Hello, ladies and gentlemen. If it's your first time, welcome, and if you are back once again, welcome back. Today we're looking at checkmate patterns, and our next pattern we're going to be checking out is how do we mate that pesky opponent king when all we have is our king and the rook. So, as we can see in our position, we have our white king and our white rook against the black king. How are we going to win this game? How are we going to deliver checkmate? Well, the first thing that we want to do, as with any checkmate that we're trying to get, is we want to make sure we drive that king back to the edge. So we're going to choose an edge of the board to try to work the other king to. In this case, because our king is below the black king, we're going to go ahead and try to drive him backward toward the 8th rank. Now, one of the things you'll notice right now is the two kings are opposite one another. The white king's on d3, the black king on d5, and this is that situation called the opposition. Because of this, the white king is guarding all three squares that the black king could potentially step forward to. This is going to be very crucial to making our pattern here work. So when it's our move, we need to be able to be blocking all three of these squares if we want to drive the black king back. So how do we do that? Well, we've got our rook on h3. We're going to go ahead and play that rook to h5. Now the rook is attacking the entire 5th rank. As we mentioned before, our king is guarding these three squares, and the black king is going to be forced backwards. So let's see where he goes. Maybe to e6 here, for example. Now, what we have to figure out is how can we create that wall again? We mentioned the king blocking out the squares of the other king. Well, one of the problems here is, let's say that we play king to e4. We know we want to have this wall of all three squares blocking so we can drive the other king back, but the problem now is that black has to make a move. If it were our move, this would be absolutely great and wonderful. We could play rook h6 and drive that black king back another rank, but it's not our turn right now, it's black's turn. So black plays king to d6. Now what are we going to do? Well, we know that if we step over in front, he can keep doing this all day. If we go to the side, then the black king can go back and forth. If we try to play check right now, the problem is the black king has this pesky little square over here, c5, to come to. So how can we get that black king back in front of our king? Well, what we're going to do, once that king is one square off like this, we're just going to play what's called a waiting move. So we're going to kill time here with our rook. Now, we don't want the black king to come to c5, so we're going to keep the rook on the 5th rank to prevent that. And we want to keep our rook as far away from the black king as possible. That way, it won't come under attack and we won't have to waste more moves getting out of the way. So we're simply going to move our rook over, rook to g5. Now black doesn't want to step back over to e6. We already know what to do if that happens. If black plays king e6, rook g6, force him back. So he's going to move to the side again. And now we can start chasing after him with our king. You'll notice here that after we play king d4, we have this knight square relationship between the two kings. Two kings are a knight square apart from one another. So when we move our king, we're ending up a knight square away, and that's going to force black to make a decision. Is he going to move back in front of our king, where we can push him back with the check, or is he going to keep running further to a different edge? Let's say that he goes king to b6. What are we going to do? Move that king, the knight square away, and then if he comes back over in front of us, king to c6, all right, what's the move here? How do we continue with our plan? If you guessed rook g6, you guessed right. That's the move here. Check along the 6th rank. The king is holding the three squares. Push our opponent's king back to the next rank. So now we're driving him backwards. We're chasing after him. One thing we can do is when we come up, rather than taking that opposition, we can play that knight square right away. Let's see what happens now As the black king runs over, we keep chasing a knight square. Now we have to be careful. The black king played to f7, so what do we do once our rook comes under attack? Well, very similar to what we mentioned before. We want to play a waiting move, and we want to get the rook to safety. So let's move the rook as far away from the black king as possible, but we're trying to drive the black king back. So we want to make sure that this rank stays cut off. So which square are we going to move the rook to now? Let's go all the way back over to rook a6. Black's trying to stay in the center. Now, if we move again, that would take the opposition. We already have that knight square. What do we do when we're a knight square away? Well, we want it to be black's turn, so let's do one more waiting move. Rook to b6. Now, the king is once again on the run. He's heading back. Here we go, we're chasing him that knight square away, and suddenly, black is finding himself all the way back toward the corner. We do it one more time here. And now he has to either go backward or back in front. Either way, the result is going to be the same. We can play what move? Rook b7. And now the black king is forced all the way back to the edge of the board. So, now we have to finish off the black king. We're chasing after him. Here he goes again. He's that knight square away. So how can we create that waiting move? Well, let's also think about where to put our rook so that we can either keep the black king on the run or make sure that our rook doesn't get under attack. We need to play a waiting move. We could play rook a7, but we know that if the black king keeps running over to this side, eventually we're going to have to move it back out of the way anyway. So rather than rook a7, I'm going to suggest let's move the rook to the other side of our king. Let's move it all the way over here to h7. Now the black king's on the run again. We're chasing him all the way to the corner. Knight square away, as we've said. He comes to a8. Our king comes to b6. And what's going to happen now? Well, only one move left. King to b8. And how do we finish it? What's going to be checkmate? If you've been looking at this pattern, we should have an idea what's coming. That's right, rook h8 and kablam. That's all she wrote. Check on the 8th rank. The white king stops all the escape squares, and we have checkmate. That's a winning game, folks. If you have any questions about this pattern, please let me know. Leave them in the comments below. Happy to go over it. There are some other ideas that can be used to try to limit your opponent's king, but what's great about this pattern is we want to make sure that we're just pushing him to the edge. We're avoiding any stalemate ideas. What's the worst thing that could have happened 2 moves before? Well, the worst thing we could have done here is, let's say that it's white to move. The worst move would have been rook to b7, right? If we try to cut off all the king's squares, but we don't attack him, that would be stalemate, and that would be a horrible blunder. So we want to keep that rook as far away from the king as possible. That way we don't end up in any stalemate accidents, any traps there. And then once he gets all the way to the edge, deliver that checkmate. Call it a day. Hope you've enjoyed this, and look forward to seeing what you can do with those rooks in your games to come.